Today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of pulling building permits, the process start to finish, and how it's a building block for greater and bigger, more fun developments. Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Hustler Show. My name is Andrew and today Ping and I are joined by Ken Bekendam, who is the longtime real estate investor right here in Canada, and he is the CEO and founder of King Homes and LegalSecondSuites.com. Ken, really great to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I know that when I was listening to some of the other podcasts that you were doing, there was a lot of mention from time to time about, the how much work you are integrating and like building inwards and how many things you're taking on. Like I know that you also launched a property management company in 2022, right? So there's like, you have to be going through this growth structure of like, doing things, and then where you have expenses, you start to internalize, right? And kind of create your own internal infrastructure. And I know from doing the renovations, honestly, the basic question I have is that, were you ever doing unpermitted work? Did you ever start off there and then...
Well, so since I started my company in 2018 to create legal apartments, legal basement apartments and stuff, right? So 95% of projects that we would do resulted from the design work and the permitting work that we did. So we actually, we had building permits for. But there's a number of stuff that, like a lot of stuff we didn't, not a lot, but a number of the projects we did in Hamilton here, when we first started, we couldn't do the legal tries and fours as of right in these old century homes. We could only do 2 units. A lot of those projects, because they had enough space, you could easily fit 3 or 4 units. The zoning didn't permit it. So we would set it up as illegal 2 with then, an illegal basement or illegal attic unit, right? Like set it up in such a way that it could still function as 4 units. Some of those projects now we're actually going back and legalizing those additional units because, we did design it in such a way that it would still meet the code requirements for a legal unit. We just didn't meet the zoning at the time. So that's why I tell clients who want to try and maximize the density, but the zoning doesn't permit it. I'm like, let's at least build it to the code for a multi-dwelling. So for those 3 and 4 units, make sure you get the fire separations and your means of egress, all that kind of stuff. So that if the zoning does change in the future, and zoning is changing, it's changing every 6 months, every year, it's changing.
At least it's changing.
Density is increasing. So then that way, when you go back to legalize it, you're just doing paperwork at that point. You don't have to actually redo any sort of renovations. Like we have done unpermitted work. Moving forward, we're doing everything under permits now, just because we don't want the headaches. And there's the extra added risk of getting caught, right? Possibly having to redo work, then the client coming back to us saying, hey, you guys should have known better. And I'm like, well, we talked about it. You wanted to go ahead with those extra units. And so it just for our own kind of protection, we've kind of stopped doing unpermitted work.
For sure. As a company grows, you want to do things as legal as possible, right? Because otherwise it's just
easier.
Yeah, it's easier. There's no headache. There's no explanation that you have to do.
It makes sense. Your company grows, you start to get more formal. You don't want to have the uncertainty of like, oh, is our work going to get stopped? What happens if it does, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to keep growing. Things should be a little predictable. But I noticed a lot of people, one of the questions that they always have when they want to, flip their own house, build an in-law suite, and they always ask the same question, should I pull a permit? And then I'm like, okay, well, what are you measuring against? And people know that the permitting takes time, takes money. And I know that even when we were doing construction jobs for clients, my dad had just one line. When people say, oh, should I pull a permit? It's like, if you want, you can do it with a permit. It's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much. And generally that's what he would tell people because of like all the extras that come along with it. So how do you justify that? Like if somebody is just starting to do their own work to their properties, like what do you recommend when it comes to balancing out that rationale?
Yeah, yes, it does take time to pull a permit, right? The cities do not move quickly, but it shouldn't cost you more on the renovation side. If you're going to go out there and build a good product, and you're going to still build it to the code, use proper trades and proper materials, like whether it's being done with the permit or without a permit, it shouldn't cost you any difference. The difference is on time in obtaining the permit, right? So that's why it's so important to get on it early. Like right away when you're going to do a renovation, get the drawings, get the measurements done, get it into the city queue because it does take time, right? When you work with somebody who's done it before, you can speed up the timeline process because there's not as many deficiencies or roadblocks at the city. I've been doing it for a good solid 5 years, especially here in Hamilton. I've got a really good sense now for their process, what they want to see, what they allow, what they don't allow. Issues that that have happened on previous projects that have really significantly delayed a project. Now I know, okay, ahead of time, I'm like, okay, we're going to need a legal lot survey, because of this issue. We know that we can't put a fire escape there because it's going to encroach too far into the side lot line and it's going to trigger a minor variance. So just thinking ahead for potential issues and already at the very beginning, making accommodations for those issues so that we don't get roadblocks once we make a submission to the city.
What's the right amount of time that people should budget? That's it, working with you and your team.
So once you have site measurements of the building, whether you use a third-party measuring company or you take your own measurements, in our case, we use a mix of a third-party measuring company and also our own on-site measurements that we take. We give ourselves, 4 to 6 weeks for architectural drawings of the building, so the as-built and then the proposed drawings. And then from there, it has to go out for mechanical design or structural design, right? So depending on the scope of work, what has to happen, we send our architectural plans out to the HVAC designer and the engineer, and they might need 2 weeks. Sometimes it could be a week, sometimes it could be 2 weeks. If they get overwhelmed with projects, sometimes they could be 3 or 4 weeks to get their stuff back, right? So it can take a good 8 weeks, so like 2 months, right? To kind of get your drawings and engineering and mechanicals kind of sorted out. And then you're at a point where you're ready to submit to the city. If you need a minor variance, that adds another 3 months to the timeline.
And then how long would that drawing to be approved? Because usually you can, we always expect some back and forth.
Depending on the type of permit you're applying for, it's change of use. So let's say you have a single family home, you want to put a basement apartment, that's a change of use permit. That's a 15 business day review cycle.
Right.
Okay. Interior alteration is 10 days. Change of use is 15 days. Once we get into the tries, fours, and so on, those are building conversions. Those are subject to a 20 business day review cycle. So that's once we submit, it sits there for 20 days. On the 20th day, they actually look at it, and then the plan examiner reviews it, puts together their list of comments, deficiencies, clarifications that they require, and then they send it back to the applicant. So then depending on the list, sometimes it could be minor stuff like, okay, you need to pay an outstanding permit fee, clarify this, provide a cross-section. It could be like pretty basic stuff. Other times it could be like, please apply to committee of adjustment for a minor variance. I'm like, oh crap, we missed this whole zoning issue, and now we got to go to the committee of adjustment to get a minor variance. That doesn't happen as much anymore, but it did happen at the beginning when I was just starting out and still kind of learning the process. But then we send it back in, and then it goes into the secondary review cycle. But the secondary review cycle, there's no legislative timeline. So this is where it all depends on the planner and the city and their workload and how diligent they are at getting back to you. And sometimes they could be quick. Sometimes they could really drag out that secondary review. And this is where if that has to go into a secondary review, they send comments back. It could go into a third review cycle. And this is where it can take many months sometimes to get that issued permit.
This is, I feel like, the bread and butter of what a lot of people do when they think, okay, I'm going to get real estate, do burst strategies, to flips, anything. Like, this is actually a lot of the stuff that people have to contend with. And when it comes to permits, I think a lot of people don't know the nuances of like what you can do, how much wiggle room do you have when you do the drawings, how much can you deviate from them, and so on and so forth. So when you're talking about that whole process, you can have a low, and as if things go smooth in terms of time frame, and a high. So what do you think is like on a duplex conversion, a low, the short end time frame and the high end time frame that you might face?
Well, so every change of use permit is a 15 business day change of use permit. That's legislated by the Building Code Act. So that's across the entire province.
But isn't that only for the first time you communicate, and after that they can take longer? Because I've definitely had them take way longer than 15 days.
There's no legislated timeline on that secondary review. And this is a big issue we have with the Building Code Act, is that there's no accountability there to the cities to actually get back to the applicant in a timely fashion, right?
Does that make you mad?
Oh, yeah. We do give them, once we make a resubmission, we do give them, 2 weeks or something, 3 weeks. But once they start like taking longer than that, then I'm emailing them, I'm calling them, I'm escalating things to supervisors and say, guys, like, what's going on? Like, how come this thing's not being reviewed? Why is it sitting on somebody's desk not being reviewed?
Is that something that you do, or do you leave it up to the architect or whoever, somebody else to do the permit?
In our company, yes, we do, because we're the ones that are applying for the permit for the client, right? Sometimes I've seen it before where the property owner gets involved and they start petitioning the city and then make inquiries into their permit, like how come it's not being issued. Sometimes the city will respond quicker to a property owner than to like a regular applicant like myself. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's what happens at the city. If you're on them like every single day, they think you're annoying and they want to get you off their desk.
Yeah,
right.
You don't. Yeah, that's an unfortunate reality, I think, across the board. Is that the person who's complaining the loudest, unfortunately, they end up getting served first, but you end up having to be that guy, right, when you don't want to be.
No, I know it's a fine line to walk. Like, I see it with my clients too, who also, get on me to get stuff done and get drawings done and out the door, and same thing, like I'm just that guy who's always on me, and like, okay, I got to get him done. I got to get him off my desk, right? The guy who doesn't say anything, it's like, okay, like he's being really patient, and kind about it, but unfortunately, sometimes it takes a back seat. It's all about just being really on top of it, on top of those timelines, always being in constant communication with the city, with the plan examiner, so that's top of mind for them as well. Because stuff does fall through the cracks, and I've seen it before where we've made a resubmission and it's gotten lost at the city.
What is the longest time that you had to wait with the city?
Well, it depends on the type of application. Like I've had applications that have taken over a year for approvals. I'm not talking like rezonings or like redevelopment types of applications. I'm just talking like a straightforward building permit application for a basement apartment or a triplex or a fourplex.
Yeah, suite additions.
That's taken over like a year. Most times it's like, less than 6 months. We're getting, by the time we start drawings, submit, it's getting done in less than 6 months. Typical times like 3 to 4 months, just based off of timelines. But yeah, it's all about just being on top of the city and just, always.
How did you handle 70 permits in your first year?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. Like at any point in time, we're sitting around 50 to 70 like active applications in that at a number of different municipalities. So we have a whole program that we use Monday.com that helps us track all of our
project manager
projects and where they're at in the design process, or if they're out with a consultant, or they're at the city, or we're waiting for a minor variance. We have it all tracked. That's the only way that we can kind of keep on top of everything. Like before I had staff kind of helping me with the process, I was doing a lot of stuff. I was measuring up the houses myself. I was sitting behind a computer, drafting it all out. I'd be, making the submissions to the city. And then I was also managing some construction work too, for some of these projects as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So it was a lot. And that's why I'm like, I can't, it's not sustainable. Like I was working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like all the time, just stuck behind this stupid ass computer.
Did you feel like you had control though?
It was growing too big for me, really, to handle all on my own. And this is when, when things are getting too crazy, stuff starts falling through the cracks, right? Drawings weren't getting done in a timely fashion because I'd have a stack of drawings sitting there waiting to be done. Stuff would get missed on construction sites because I wasn't actively being out on site doing my walkthroughs as often as I should to catch mistakes, right? So stuff starts falling through the cracks, and you can't have, if you have too much stuff on the go, like shit hits the fan, you're not doing good at anything. Like everything is just falling apart. So that's why I decided to start hiring CoOp students from Mohawk actually to help with all the drafting work. And it was through one of my CoOp students, Freddie, who's from Brazil, that we were able to get connected with a bunch of designers in Brazil. So I got a whole design team about, depending on the volume, but anywhere from 5 to 7 designers in Brazil who help with CAD work as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's really helped keep up the volume of CAD work and drafting work that we do. So that's been an interesting kind of process because they all speak Portuguese there.
And you also get the cost down, right? Because you're not hiring someone local here.
Yeah, so the cost rate is much lower. It's the only way I've been able to kind of keep up the volume of design projects that we do. Like right now we're sitting about between 140, 150 kind of permit applications a year for conversion projects. So at any point in time, we have 50 to 70 kind of active applications in.
With respect, again, just to get a little nitty gritty with some of the permitting stuff. One of the other questions that people ask, I'm never quite sure how to answer, is can they get any work started before they do any construction? Because there's 2 approaches where you can go full on, don't apply for permit, and then people will just back permit, ask for forgiveness later, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then some people, and we do this sometimes, will get the permit in place. And then there's some work that you can just generally go and do, anticipating that's going to get approved by this date. So that waiting period doesn't become so inefficient.
Yeah.
Right? And do you have a measurement of work that you're generally able to do?
Yeah, look, the technical answer is you're not supposed to start any work. You're not even supposed to start demolition work unless you have a building permit in hand. But because of the delays in getting the permit, we're always starting work prior, right? Just to get on top of the queue or the timeline. So we'll get in, we'll get demolition started, we'll open things up, we'll start walking our trades through, we start opening up the floor and doing our underground plumbing. We just don't, bury anything in. We don't pour the concrete back in the floor. We don't start drywalling, but we'll get our rough-ins all done. Yeah. We'll get all the framing done, the fire separations done, mechanical rough-ins done, and basically up to that point, and then just stop and wait until we have our permit.
Basically, don't hide anything.
Just don't hide it.
Don't hide.
Yeah.
Right? Anything that has to be inspected has to be visible to the building inspector.
Is there any repercussion that you've ever faced as a result of that? Because I know that technically speaking, you're not supposed to start, right? But people do.
So here's the thing: is if you start your your project before you have the issued building permit, things can change through the permitting process.
Yeah.
Right? So there's lots of examples where we've submitted a floor plan and then we've had to go and adjust the floor plan or adjust a window size based off of a review comment from the city plan examiner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if guys all of a sudden they start framing up the house based off of this unapproved floor plan, there is a risk that you might have to adjust something, or that window that you ordered actually no longer complies and we have to put a bigger window in for whatever reason.
Okay, a window might be a bit a more challenging example, but let's say if you have partition walls, if let's say construction-wise you decided, okay, it just makes more sense for the wall to be here and it doesn't quite line up with the drawings, do you adjust the wall later to the drawings or do you adjust the drawings to where the wall
There's
is?
always adjustments that get made on site. So when we come in and we measure up a building, and if the building is not demoed, we're measuring to existing partition walls or, structural elements are hidden behind drywall. We can't quite see what's going on. We can't get that perfect, measurement. The drawings aren't going to be 100% accurate, right? It's always best to have demolition completed first, then go in with your designer, measure up everything, because now they can measure brick to brick, block to block. They can measure exactly to that structural column. They can see the actual size of the structural beam. They can see all the elements that they have to design around. That's going to make their drawings way more accurate. But that's easier said than done sometimes. You can't always demolish everything before you get started on the drawing process. What we've been recommending to clients lately is, okay, we'll come in, we'll measure what we can measure as best as we can, put together as accurate as a drawing as we can. Once you get the finishings demolished, let us come back and double check our dimensions, right? To make sure that everything is going to work and work out properly. Because there's been countless examples where we've designed something pre-demolition and then the guys are in there constructing and everything is off, right? Because all of a sudden walls have to start shifting, maybe to align with the structural column, and then everything else no longer works out. All of a sudden, that bathroom doesn't fit anymore where you thought it could fit, right? And so there's always adjustments that happen on site. We're trying to minimize how many on-site adjustments have to take place because sometimes it can screw up everything. All of a sudden, you got to move a wall a foot. That could have issues with your kitchen design, right? With a fridge fitting in further down the line, or trying to make that bathtub fit now, or it can cause issues, right? But what people have to realize is that it's just a drawing. It's not like an IKEA manual, step-by-step instruction guide for how to construct a home. It's the drawings are there to show general conformity with the Ontario Building Code and conformity with the zoning bylaw. That's it. It's not a construction manual. And sometimes people look at a drawing and they say, oh, it says here 10 feet, 9.5 inches. And they the guys in the field, they do exactly to that dimension, not really giving consideration for structural columns, plumbing stacks, anything else that has to be worked around. And this is where all of a sudden you send in your framers, they're framing to the exact dimensions on the floor plan. You show up and guys, why the hell did you put this wall here?
No,
It doesn't make any sense.
They're not thinking. Yeah.
There's no comment,
Common sense.
So, and this is a frustration that we have sometimes with our own company, with our own guys, relying too much on the drawings and not using their own common sense or their own judgment out in the field when they're, setting up their walls and where they're planning to put, plumbing stacks and drains and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of those issues have happened because drawings were started based off of pre-demoed houses and we never went back to double check stuff afterwards.
So the same way you have trades butting heads, you also have, I think, in sort of different departments who are just not really thinking about what's easier for the next guy. And that's always, I think, a challenge to bring in. Do you in-house you in-house a lot of your drawings, right? So your architectural
Yeah, we do all the drawings in-house.
Yeah.
We have our own in-house framers. All the mechanical trades are subbed out, electrician, plumber, gas guy.
But architectural drawings you do yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, that would technically make it a little bit easier because there's more accountability. Because I find that, even the mechanical, I understand how it can be challenging. I see sometimes people doing mechanical drawings and they will run ducts through what is a glass partition wall. And it's obviously a glass. And how you're going to do that, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of consideration. But if you're able to in-house it, I think you have a greater degree of control.
So there's got to be, and we're discovering this the hard way, okay?
Yeah.
Through a lot of mistakes. Everything we've learned has been through mistakes. But as we get into these more complex conversion projects, 3s, 4s, 8s, 10, 12, the mechanical systems get much more complex, okay? Very simply, there's just a lot more going on when it comes to mechanicals. And if there's not good coordination between the architectural drawings and the mechanical designs, this is where we see stupid shit happen on site with where they put ducts or where the HVAC designer had designed something not giving consideration. So basically it goes back to the consultant. So in our case, basically me, to basically oversee the architectural plans and make sure that it works with the mechanical plans. And if adjustments have to be made, basically communicate between the designer and the HVAC designer to make sure that it's going to work. That's easier said than done. You can't just like send in your architecturals out for mechanicals, get the mechanicals back and submit to the city without actually closely reviewing what's been designed out.
Yeah, you can just coordinate. You have to actually do a review and then make sure everything makes sense before you submit.
Yeah, and sometimes we have to, once we get a mechanical design back, sometimes we have to go to our HVAC contractor and say, hey, look, here's the design we got. Do you see any issues with what's been designed out? Does it make sense where they've put that? And sometimes we have to make a site visit back to the property with the drawings in hand and make sure that it can actually work on site before we go and just simply submit it to the city. Definitely, there's a lot more site visits, a lot more consultation work that has to take place on these projects as you get into them. Like a bungalow conversion is one thing, it's pretty straightforward. Don't get me wrong, there can be issues that come up with where people put ducts and pipes and stuff. But definitely when you get into the tries, the fours, the larger building conversions, like way more meetings. And this stuff takes time to coordinate meetings, set up a Zoom call, maybe book an on-site meeting with the contractor, with the HVAC designer, with the architectural designer, with the engineer, and go over everything like 10 times before guys actually start the work. You don't want to have to go back and redo things. You know,
I almost hope that we had this conversation a lot earlier. We could have just used your service to deal with a lot of our frustrations right now.
Yeah, because connecting all that, I mean, it sounds stressful. By the way, when you're saying it's like, okay, it's not going to necessarily increase the cost of the work, but even some of the frustrations that you're going to have to contend with on this, especially if you're doing multiple permits, putting that many moving parts together is obviously going to have challenges, and there is a cost and time element to it, which is why I think with anybody who's going to be listening to this, if they're going to be thinking about pulling permits, they might be now thinking, well, maybe I should be considering doing a back permit or something. That's why a lot of people do it, right?
Or just hire someone to do it.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And we don't think, we always advocate for people to pull permits because like it's better to be safer because people can get into a lot of trouble, especially when they don't know what they're doing. At least the permits make it sure that you're doing things properly.
Well, the big thing with permits is you get a third-party check on the work. People underestimate the value of that. If you don't have a permit, nobody else is checking in on the work. You're solely relying on your contractor saying, oh yeah, it's to code and it's good, it's safe, right?
And they don't know how to vet the contractor.
And we see there's lots of issues with contractors and guys. Like everybody's busy, everybody's trying to get in and get out, right? Mistakes happen. But yeah, you need that building inspector coming on site, looking at the work that's been done, making sure it's good and meets the code. But yeah, like there's so many benefits to having it legal. Keep the city off your back, keep the tenants off your back, keep the neighbor off your back, being able to sleep well at night, like, liability issues, right? With fires and all that kind of stuff.
I completely agree with you because a lot of times landlords feel like they're being held hostage by the tenants because the units are not legal. And that's part of the reason why you should kind of go through the proper process, permitting process.
I've seen more issues as a result of the tenant than from the city when it comes to illegal units. Like these new smoke detectors, for instance, are ultra sensitive, right? We get so many faulty alarms from smoke detectors going off because of a spider or a dust mite or humidity levels actually, especially as we get into the summer now. I always see an influx of nuisance phone calls for smoke alarms going off, and 9 out of 10 times it has to do with humidity.
We've had it where we've gone through the entire effort of changing out all the smoke detectors and just using a different brand and thinking that will work. And sometimes it does help because it has to do with sensitivity. But that is an interesting thing to know, is that if we maybe can add that to the list of troubleshooting, put in the dehumidifier, see if that helps, and then that might actually resolve the issue.
How many construction do you handle or renovation project do you handle? Because you do the permitting process up to 70 in your first year, and then the year after you said that you pretty much doubled it again.
Yeah.
But how much like renovation construction did you or your team handle at the time?
Between 30 to 40 projects, active like construction sites.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That's a lot of
So it's a coordination work, Yeah.
Do you hire, is it mostly staff or subcontract?
So we have on the construction side, I think between 15 and 20 guys, like in-house guys, salaried, like
on payroll.
On payroll.
Are they like general carpenter kind of guys, or are they?
Yeah, they're general labor. So they're framers, finishers, general labor, right? Guys who do the demo work or sweep the floors and all that kind of stuff, do deliveries and that kind of thing. And then we rely on a lot of sub-trades as well. What we're finding though is, like many other companies and businesses, it's hard finding good quality, skilled trades, skilled help, finding people who just want to put in a good hard day of work and show up and put a good effort. So, as some of the guys have dropped off or that we've let go, we're not necessarily replacing them automatically. We're looking more to sub trades to fill that gap, because sometimes it's easier to find more sub trades than it is actual good skilled employees. So it's a balancing act. Yeah, it's tough work, right? Like renovation work is you got to find good guys who enjoy it.
Yeah, you gotta have the projects lined up, you gotta have people, and then the moment that you have I would say over 7 to 8 projects, now you need to add the management layer, which chews up your margin too.
Yeah.
So 30 to 40, that's extremely impressive.
So we have a full-time guy in our office who's a project coordinator, project manager, and basically does a lot of just driving around and stopping at all the sites, making sure that the guys on site have what they need, anticipating the next steps coming up, making sure that, trades are lined up. A lot of phone calls, a lot of driving around. I know in our experience where we've failed on doing those walkthroughs at those critical stages of the construction process, if we don't do those, mistakes happen all the time. So it's so important, once demolition is done, do a walkthrough, right? Before framing starts, walk through with your framer and make sure that we can put the walls here, that there's not a structural deficiency that has to be addressed first. Once framing is done, don't just send your mechanical trades a start based off of the drawing. Actually have a walkthrough with them, with the drawings in hand, say, hey, look, is this actually going to work out? And you have to make site adjustments, right? So those walkthroughs are crucial to minimizing rework of stuff, right? Which will save money.
I think you did an amazing job on hiring the right people, setting up the right SOP, so that you have time to actually do a podcast with us. Because it just sounds like this type of work or managing the construction and permitting process, there's a lot of moving parts, right?
Yeah, I have also on the construction side, I have business partners who work and help me with the company. So my day-to-day stuff is not solely just construction, because there's other guys that kind of handle a lot of that. My focus every day really is on designs, consultations, city work, trying to get permits approved and issued. Right. Because construction work can't really start until you got that permit in hand. So just trying to find the highest and best use, right, for clients, analyzing properties, buildings, doing walkthroughs. It takes a team of people to do. If it was just me, I would have probably packed this all in a long time ago and not done anything anymore, because it gets very frustrating.
So before we start talking about your passion project, right, the church conversions and there's a stack townhouse, the 66 units that you're going through the process right now. Before we talk about that, I just wanted to ask you, when did you feel the need to start doing the vertical horizontal integration for your service right now? Because back in 2018, you started doing the permitting process, doing the planning for some clients. When did you feel the need to actually start adding more and more services and start really scaling up for your business?
Yeah, when I started, I was just doing the design stuff. Then I started acting as a project manager along with the property owner for the construction side. And then it was at that point that I realized, well, I might as well just do all the construction work myself in-house and not just act as a project manager, but then just act as a general contractor, because that's what I was. But then that got too much for me to handle. So then I entered into a partnership with another guy to basically handle all the construction related activity. And then as a result of that we started seeing, look, okay, we're starting to pump out a lot of units, both for ourselves, but also for our clients, that there's an opportunity there for project management, right? And as I got busier, as my partner got busier with the business, we weren't able to manage our own portfolio as well as we used to, right? Because of the demands on our time. That combined with all these units coming up for clients, we were able to get enough units kind of together that we could afford to pay a girl in our office full time to basically be a property manager. And so then that's when we formed Black Box Property Management, basically to serve our own personal projects, but then some of our clients. It's not a business that we actively promote or push or even want to grow necessarily. It's a necessary part of what we're doing.
Right.
In order for me to have enough time to do what I do, I need help managing properties.
Yeah, to also maintain control too.
Just to maintain control, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So it's not a profitable business. Property management is not it's not a profitable business.
It gives you control, and it depends on whether some people who operate property management businesses, is really the catalyst of what comes around all the infrastructure, right? The renovations, the maintenance, the client relationships, and that's where we tell people that's where it grows. But property management on its own, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of moving parts, relatively thankless in terms of the work that you do. It's very time consuming.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to free yourself of time, it's like you have to be able to scale away from that.
So like what's nice about the property management stuff is that, yeah, if we get a maintenance call or we're doing a unit turnover, like we just use the guys in the construction company to kind of do that work, right?
There's a synergy.
It's not all roses. Like there's definitely challenges there. Same thing just with doing proper site visits to the properties that are completed that have to be, maintained, making sure that you're walking around, picking up garbage, make sure they're clean, make sure the grass is cut,
right.
Make sure tenants have enough garbage bag tags, and raccoons aren't getting into all the cans and right. So it's constant. It's
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. So at which moment did you look into church conversion? Right, because obviously that's going to be a huge project, right?
Yeah, so this was 2 years ago that I bought the church, and the reason I bought it at the time was because I was still doing bungalow conversions and getting to some tries, and I was looking for a building or a house, and I'm looking around. This thing came across MLS. Okay, I'm like, there's a lot of space there, listed at like 450. So I'm looking at this church, 450. I'm looking at a bungalow just a couple doors down, listed at like 600, or 550. I'm like, heck, look at all the space I can get, and it's going to be cheaper than buying any other bungalow on the street. I just bought it because of the square footage. I knew I had to go through rezoning, like obviously part of my due diligence so I paid $420 ultimately for it. This was 2 years ago. And so part of my due diligence before I even went firm on it, like I approached the city and say, hey, look, here's this opportunity. What would it take to kind of, to say, well, you have to go through a rezoning, like a zoning bylaw amendment to change, because it was zoned institutional as a church. I had to rezone it to, in this case, is R4A, which is like a medium density zoning in the city of Brantford. So then I had to take it through this whole rezoning process. And so I did hire a planning consultant, IBI group, to help me with the planning approval for it. I did it as a learning exercise, relatively low risk learning exercise to understand the land development, the redevelopment process. At that point, I had never done anything like that as far as taking something through a rezoning and working with all the consultants. So for me, it's kind of like a university education and land development, right? I had to hire a planner, had to work with civil engineers, had to work with, had to get a heritage impact study. So I had to work with heritage consultants. I had to get a fire hydrant study done. I had to get a parking study done. So I'm working with parking consultants. I had to put a stormwater management tank in for this parking lot. So then, I had to go out and hire geotechnical engineers to do drill holes and do some testing on the soil.
And you're just learning this on the go.
Yeah, right.
So
along with my planning consultant, like also I was relying on my planning consultant as well, guiding me and helping me through the process. There's a lot that goes into these redevelopment processes, and you're working with a whole different set of consultants now. Whereas before, when I was doing a bungalow conversion, I worked with an HVAC designer and I worked with an engineer, and obviously the architectural designer, right? So just your list of people is very small. When you get into the larger projects and the redevelopment work, your whole list of consultants grows as well.
And are you the one who's doing all the coordination, or you have a one point of contact who's doing the coordination for all of those people?
It depends. So obviously for a rezoning, you work with a certified planner, okay, to help you through the process. And sometimes that certified planner will also help coordinate any of the additional consultants that would be required as part of an application to the city. They could hire the parking consultant for you, or the civil engineer, or whatever else has to be done. So in my case, because for the church was my first one, I was relying on my planning consultant to help me find those people. I never had to shop around for a parking consultant before. I had no idea where to even go for one. So he recommended one to me. So then he actually facilitated getting the estimates in for the parking study. Nice. And then I would review it and then sign off on it, and I'd pay them directly for the parking studies and whatnot. Now that I've kind of gone through that process, and now I have my list of consultants, heritage, parking, all these guys now. So the next projects, I'm going to them directly now, because I have my whole list of consultants now.
Right.
And then, so the planner is really just doing the planning specific work, right? And representation at the hearing.
And how much is the soft cost?
It depends on the size of the project.
Right. This one.
The church?
Yeah.
Okay, so my planning costs were $54,000. So with my urban planner, and that basically took me through the zoning bylaw amendment process and halfway through the site plan application process. Because halfway through our site plan application, Bill 23 came out, and we no longer needed site plan approval for our development. Anyways, so it's only like halfway through that. Part of that 54,000 was him also helping coordinate the consultants. So he would help facilitate emails with the parking lady, the heritage people, the civil engineers, the geotechnical guys. The list goes on and on. On top of that was the actual consultants. So all the bills for the consultants. So I had to pay for the parking study, pay for the heritage impact study, pay the geotechnical, the landscape architect, the photometric plans. Right now, I'm just starting my demolition. So up till now, I've been about $100,000 into my plannings and approvals, including like my building permit submission fee and all of my permit fees that I had to pay. So I'm just around $103,000 on that. I've had to carry the property for 2 years.
I was meaning to ask, did you have to finance the church, or was that challenging when you were acquiring the church? Because when you say a bungalow at $600, $450 for the church, a church is considered more challenging to
it's a vacant church. Who's going to lend on a vacant church?
Yeah.
It's private. A private family friend who basically loaned money to secure the church. So I had my own money as well that I put into closing. And so I just had a small $250,000 kind of first mortgage from a private lender on it. So my monthly carrying costs were not that high as far as like interest payments. It's interest only. It's really expensive though, is basically like a vacant building insurance policy for a church. So I was, paying through the nose for insurance. All the utilities were shut off. Well, they're shut off now. So I had a break-in where they came in and they started cutting copper wires and pipes and stuff. And so they ended up cutting a copper pipe.
Happened to us too.
Started flooding. And I was doing weekly, bi-weekly walkthroughs just to make sure, no major vandalism. And in one of my walkthroughs, I discovered water gushing. Actually, I got a notification from the city that of a high water usage. So then I went down there. Water's been gushing. So I ended up being like a $1,200 water bill, which the city would not cover for me. So I came out of my own pocket. So yeah, lesson learned, on that stuff is, if you have a vacant building, it's going to be sitting vacant for a while, just shut everything off. Shut up everything. Gas, water, hydro, shut it right down.
The gas one is interesting because, again, because of vandalism, that can actually be a problem. We would typically shut off water because, you don't want the pipes to freeze, anything to burst, right? But gas, you might not, doesn't always occur to everybody to just shut it off too. But you get a gas leak at a property and then the fire department comes and then you find out about it through some random phone call, and these can be like pretty devastating.
The building's going to be gutted. There's no sense in keeping the heat on or nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Just get everything shut down. So these are the challenges sometimes on these larger vacant buildings that sit there could sit there for 2 years as you go through a redevelopment process. Is what do you do with that building while it's sitting there? And even a vacant building insurance policy, you're still required to do bi-weekly visits there to make sure that there's no major vandalism.
By the way, I forgot to ask, what's your vision on this church conversion? How many units are you putting in?
So we're converting it to 6 apartment units.
6 apartment units.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I also looked at that as well. I'm like, okay, for only 6 units, was it worth the waiting period for 2 years for only 6 units? What is kind of saving me on that project is the fact that I bought it for only $420. So my purchase price, right? This goes back to fundamental real estate. You got to buy right. Because if you buy right, you can handle carrying the property for longer. Mm-hmm. You can handle permits taking longer, construction going over budget, right? Because you've bought it right. So I got an as-built appraisal for it of $1.9 million on it. It's not done yet, obviously, but because I was struggling with this idea of 2 years for only 6 units, is it worth my time and energy on it? But the way the numbers are going to shake out is that it'll still be a very profitable project. My little education here of a little redevelopment project of a church, I'm learning and realizing through this process, my personal time is way better spent on redevelopment work, adaptive reuse projects, land development projects, right? Working with planners, working with consultants, doing a bit larger scale redevelopment work. And so that's what led me into the townhouse development project, where I was, seeing the amount of energy and effort it was taking me on the church. I'm like, okay, I'm getting a good handle on this process. It's not as scary as I thought it was going to be. Yes, it's a shit ton of meetings, a lot of Zoom meetings with consultants. But when you're getting to the larger projects, you're also relying more on the consultants doing the lion's share of the work because you have to rely on consultants. So your job as the developer is really just, you're the quarterback. You're the one who coordinates the meetings, you set up the Zoom meetings, you get everybody together, you cast the vision, they tell you that you can't do it, and then you find a way to do it. That can be very creative work, right? taking a blank piece of land and figuring out how to position the blocks of townhouses on it. And I know in our example, we were able to kind of reconfigure this site slightly where we could add an additional 2 units. So now what we thought was going to be 66 is now going to be 68. We were able to squeeze in another 2 just by, changing things up a bit. So I'm finding it's a better return on my time. For me, as I'm moving forward, is not so much about making a good ROI on projects. It's more like, what's the return on my time? If I'm going to spend a month on this, or I'm going to spend 6 months on this project, like what's it going to net me on the back end? So this is why I tell people you can spend the same amount of energy on a bungalow conversion and get 2 units. You can spend that same amount of energy on a tri or fourplex and get 4 units. And it doesn't take you any more time out of your life.
How does somebody go about a duplex conversion?
It's really not that complex. Step 1 is you have to know the zoning of the property. Step 2 would be figuring out if that conversion is going to require any minor variances. Step 3 is your heights, your ceiling heights, making sure you have the height, zoning, parking, ceiling heights.
What are some of the design considerations you see are coming up and trending as per people's request or required?
We're seeing increasing desire for universal design, which is taking into account like accessible spaces, not just mobility, not just wheelchair ramps and stuff like that, but designing a space that it could serve many different types of people. They may be blind. They could be deaf. They could be our seniors that are getting older. How we design staircases, not just minimum building code, but how do we design out a space that could serve those types of people? We're having many more conversations like that now than we used to.
For entry-level investors who are trying to get into real estate in 2023, what's your recommendation?
You can't make the numbers work off of a 2-unit conversion anymore, unfortunately. Even for a new investor starting out, they should be looking at least minimum a triplex or 4plex. That's kind of like the starting point for an investor. It's very tight on a 2-unit conversion now. So don't be afraid to jump into those slightly more complex projects, but you have to recognize that they are more complex. You have to really work with a good team on it.